Welcome, animal science students, to Nutrition 5, Evaluation of Feedstuffs. The evaluation of feedstuffs is critical as part of overall nutritional program management. So first we need to know what the nutrient requirements of our animals are. And that's going to be influenced by stage of growth for the animals, productivity level. What do we want? What's our goal for average daily gain? Are they lactating, and what's our goal for pounds of milk per day or litter weight at 21 days, etc. So it's very important to know what the nutrient requirements of the animals are. Next, what are we going to feed our animals? And it is amazing all the different things that we feed animals. And we need to evaluate those feedstuffs very carefully for amount of energy and what's going to be available to the animals. What's the digestibility? Are there any anti-nutritional factors? For example, in soybeans, if you are feeding rice soybeans, raw soybeans will contain a substance known as trypsin inhibitor. It prevents the animals from synthesizing the amino acid trypsin. So we generally have to cook those soybeans first. Cost, we don't necessarily want the lowest cost ration, but we want the best cost ration. What we pay for feeds is an investment in getting productivity from those animals. Okay, nutrient quality and availability, and how much can we put a particular feedstuff in before we may decrease palatability or whatever. So we take all this into account, we formulate the rations, then we have to make sure it's mixed correctly and processed correctly, stored correctly, etc. And then we make it available to the animals. We want to minimize feed wastage. Feed wastage isn't going to be 0%, but we certainly don't want it any more than 4 or 5% feed wastage. And then we monitor the results and the cost, and if everything works correctly, great. If we're not at our optimal performance level, we may have to kind of start over again through the system here. We generally classify feedstuffs into 8 different categories. So our dry forages and roughages, that would include alfalfa hay, grass hay. What's the difference between a roughage and a forage? A roughage is generally even higher in fiber and less nutrient dense than forages. So alfalfa hay, grass hay, I'd consider that forage. If we're feeding straw to an animal or corn stover, which is left after we take the corn grain around we might call that a roughage. And then range, pasture, green forages. What are those? Range versus pasture. In Minnesota, we have pastures. Range is what you're going to find out west. So range land is generally maybe semi-arid, not enough rainfall, or really poor quality forage that you need quite a few acres per animal out on the range. And green forages, sometimes known as green chop, well, we'll take a tractor and chopper and wagon and go out there and cut the corn or alfalfa or grass, just cut it right off and bring it right into the animals to eat. That's known as green chop. And then our silages are fermented forages. So we take the whole plant corn silage, we chop it up, we'll put it in an oxygen limiting structure, whether that's an upright silo or a bunco silo or big silage bag. And bacteria ferment the silage and produce fatty acids. And in this fermentation process, we actually increase the digestibility of the forage because the microbes start the digestion process. So these three up here, kind of all known as forages, the silage, it's the whole plant. It's not as energy or protein dense as some of our other feedstuffs down the list here. So any feedstuff with greater than 18% protein would be considered in these top three categories here. Going to be less digestible than some of our other feedstuffs down the line. Next, let's go with the energy feedstuffs. Contains less fiber, so it's more digestible, and less than 20% protein. If it's more than 20% protein, would probably put it into the protein supplement category. Number one energy feedstuff in Minnesota would be corn grain. We grow an awful lot of corn grain, and that corn is used for different purposes. One purpose would be production of ethanol. Corn grain is also used for human consumption, if you've had cornflakes for breakfast, for example. And a lot of the corn grain is fed to livestock to increase the energy density, to get more milk per cow, to make those pigs grow faster. So corn is the number one energy feedstuff that we feed. Any grain would be considered relatively high in energy because grain is going to contain starch. So oats, barley, wheat would all be considered energy feedstuffs. And then we also may feed plant oils like soybean oil, or we may feed byproducts of the slaughter industry like tallow or lard to our pigs to increase the energy density. All right, next on the list here, protein supplements contain low in fiber and high in protein. Number one protein supplement in Minnesota would be soybean meal. So we grow a lot of soybeans. We extract the oil for human consumption and industrial purposes. And what we have left is soybean meal, which is going to be about 50% protein. And the nice thing about soybean meal, the amino acid contents complements very well with the amino acid profile that we have in corn grain. So soybean meal is the number one protein supplement. Distillers grains would be another protein supplement that we utilize in Minnesota. And then we talk about minerals and vitamins, so definitely mineral supplements, salt, ground limestone, dicalcium phosphate would be mineral supplements. And then we may or may not add vitamins to the ration. And then non-nutritive additives. What would be a non-nutritive additive? Well, sometimes we add flavoring agents. We may especially do that with companion animal food. We can add food coloring. So when you buy that bag of dog food or cat food, it may be red and green and pink. Now, food colorings is not really going to influence how much your dog's going to eat, but food colorings more or less for the humans. We can add growth promotants, would be non-nutritive additive, like we can add antibiotics or medicines to our feedstuffs. Well, first we're going to evaluate our feedstuffs for energy content. And kind of old system was the TDN system, which stands for Total Digestible Nutrients. And animal scientists came up with the TDN system back over 100 years ago already. But what is TDN? It is the digestible crude protein in a feedstuff plus the digestible crude fiber. Now, fiber is not going to be as digestible as these other components, but we can digest some of the fiber. Digestible nitrogen-free extract would be the starches and the sugars in our foodstuffs. And then digestible fat times 2.25 because fat contains more energy than these other foodstuffs. Now this is an example of the amount of energy, or TDN, in 100 grams of swine or poultry diet. So this would be a probably corn grain based diet balanced with soybean meal and the minerals and vitamins needed. So in this 100 grams of feed, this would be a young pig's diet at 20% protein. Protein is 75% digestible for this pig. Now, if the protein stays in the digestive tract long enough, essentially 100% of it is digested, but as the pigs eat, some of the feedstuffs is pushed through before it's totally digested. That's why we're only at 75% here. 20 grams times 75% digestible is 15 grams of TDN. The nitrogen-free extract would be mostly starch, 60 grams, 85% digestible. So 60 times 0.85 is 51 grams of TDN there. The fiber, now our corn grain-based diet is not going to have that much fiber in, but it's still 10% fiber. Now the fiber is only going to be 20% digestible for this pig, so we're just getting 2 grams of TDN from the fiber. And we have about 5% fats. Corn grain is close to 5% fat, so there you go. Fat is very digestible, 85%, times the 2.25. So we're getting quite a bit of energy in that small amount of fat. So total amount of TDN in our put together ration here, we're at 77.56%. So our 77% TDN in our ration would be considered a pretty high energy ration. The TDN system, relatively simple, kind of easy way to balance a ration, and people utilize the TDN system for many years. Well, currently most rations are going to be balanced using the metabolizable energy or net energy that's available in that feedstuffs. So in this case, we're counting calories. Just like for human nutrition, we're counting calories. Now a calorie is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water, 1 degree Celsius, from 15.5 degrees to 16.5 degrees Celsius. All right, so precise definition there. So you can take any organic substance and you can burn it and measure the heat released, and you know how many calories contained in that feedstuffs. All right, so for poultry swine diets, we balance it with kilocalories. Now, a kilocalorie is 1,000 calories based on the definition that we have up above there. Now, 1 kilocalorie is the same as 1 calorie for human nutrition. So in human nutrition, way back when, someone decided that, hey, we don't want to talk about kilocalories. That sounds kind of complicated. We'll just call it calories. And we'll always use just a capital C so people know we're talking about kilocalories. Well, over time, people kind of dropped the capital C when they're talking about human calories. We're just talking about calories, but for humans, realize when you say that cheeseburger contains 700 calories, it's really 700 kilocalories. Now for dairy and beef diets, since they're bigger animals and they eat more, just so we have to use fewer digits, we're using megacalories. And 1 megacalorie equals 1,000 kilocalories. like I say, so we can burn any organic matter. We can burn in the laboratory and determine how many calories that foodstuff contains. Here's a example, kind of going through these the calorie type system here. So on average, and it's going to vary, but on average, carbohydrate produces 4,000 calories per gram. Fat over twice as much, 9,450 calories per gram, and protein about the same energy content as we have in carbohydrates. So if we've got a sample of feed and we've got 4 grams of carbohydrates, 20 grams of protein, 2 grams of fat, that particular little sample there would contain 116.9 kilocalories. So here we have an example of kind of partitioning out that energy that cow is going to consume. So typical dairy cattle ration that we have here, it's going to be probably about 15% crude fiber. So we've got some fiber in there that's going to reduce the digestibility. So gross energy, that is what the cow consumes. That's what goes into her belly, all right? Now, typical dairy cattle ration is going to be 70% digestible. 30% of the energy is going to be in the feces. Now, of course, there's some places around the world yet where they'll collect the cow patties and they'll burn them for heat. So definitely there is heat left in energy left in that fecal material. Okay, what happens to what's digested? All right, the cow can't utilize it all, so we lose 5% for urinary energy. Now, you don't necessarily think of being able to burn the urine, but if you dry the urine down, remove all the liquid, there are compounds there that contain energy. All right, so in the process, we're also going to have gaseous energy. Those microbes digest the fibrous material, and they produce the volatile fatty acids that the cow can utilize. They also produce methane, which the cow burps out, and that's the gaseous energy that's lost. So what we have left is metabolizable energy, all right? So that gets into the cells that the cells can utilize. And if, as they're metabolizing this energy, an animal's body produces heat, and that accounts to about 20%. Now in the wintertime under cold weather, it's nice to have that heat. When it's summertime and it's 95 degrees out, well, that heat is not so good. But there is heat created in the metabolizing that energy component. So of the gross energy that goes into the cow, 40% can be utilized by the cow for maintenance, and maintenance just the energy that it takes to keep the heart pumping 24 hours a day. You need to breathe in and out. The cow needs to chew its food, etc. So that's going to be the maintenance requirement. And what we have left is for production. And production will generally divide that between growth, lactation, and gestation as far as energy needed for fetal growth. All right, we're going to go through an example of a proximate analysis of a feed stuff, and this is a feed that we may be feeding to in a finishing pig diet where we're at 13% protein in the diet. So starting off here, we're going to do a dry matter calculation. We're going to dry this feed down. Now, this would be dry feed to the touch, but it's just air dried. So air dried feed is still going to contain some moisture, usually around that 12%. A feed stuff is either moisture or dry matter, the two add to 100%. Of this 88% dry matter now, we've removed the water. We're at about 5% ash, and this is the minerals that are in the feed. Minerals do not burn, the organic matter burns, so we can burn it to find the amount of ash. Okay, organic matter at 83% then. We're feeding a 13% protein ration, very typical in a pig's diet. So of the organic matter, we've removed the protein, and what we have left here is the fats and the carbohydrates. So typical pig's diet may be 4% fat, and corn is about 4% corn oil. So there you go. And so most of the energy though is going to be in the carbohydrates. Crude fiber at about 10%. That's the fiber that you have in that corn, around that seed of corn, the covering around the corn plant. Then the nitrogen-free extract, your sugars, starches. Simple sugars at about 5%. Fructose is going to be in that kernel of corn. And it's going to be mostly starches, 50%, and then your water-soluble vitamins, well less than 1% as far as your B vitamins, and maybe small amount of vitamin C. So we're just missing the fat-soluble vitamins, and the fat-soluble vitamins are going to be contained back here in the fat. So here we just have a little review on that Proximate analysis. We found the ash, ether extract, which was the fat, crude protein, and we've got the carbohydrates, which we include the nitrogen-free extract plus the crude fiber here. And in this center column here, we have the different components, what we find over here. Well, one thing about the Proximate analysis, which is kind of a weak spot, is that as we do that Proximate analysis, the crude fiber does not contain all the fiber. It contains the cellulose, it contains part of the lignin, and lignin is the indigestible crude fiber, so it doesn't even contain all the lignin. And then we have the cellulose up here, which as far as nutrient value is very similar to the cellulose. So the Van Suss system came along several years ago to kind of divide up this fiber more accurately. So now with the Van Suss method, we have the ADF, we have the NDF. So the NDF is going to contain cellulose, all the lignin, and the hemicellulose. So NDF is probably most often used to determine intake. The more NDF you have, the more fiber in the diet, the lower the intake. There's just more chewing time, and it takes longer for the feedstuffs to pass through the digestive system. And NDF is also just a good measure of how healthy we can keep that track as well. So even though you don't want maybe a lot of fiber for most animals to keep a healthy digestive tract, you need a little bit of fiber in the diet. So we're balancing rations. We don't want too much fiber, but we need at least a small amount of fiber. So here we just have the definition of how is NDF calculated. It involves a neutral detergent that dissolves the plant pectins, protein, sugars, lipids. That leaves behind the fibrous parts such as cellulose, lignin, and hemicellulose. And then if we take that NDF and we further process it with an acid detergent, that will leave just the cellulose and lignin, which is the ADF portion. And that concludes Nutrition 5, Evaluation of Foodstuffs. It might be time for a nap. You guys have a good day.